Tonight, in a primetime exclusive, I sit down with Rudy Giuliani to ask what happened to America's favorite mayor. You're under indictment right now, accused of fraud, forgery, election tampering.
There isn't a single thing I've done that I can't explain.
Why have you been disbarred in New York? You don't filter yourself sometimes.
I'm a frustrated actor. Well, you better have your mask on tonight.
How can you have the biggest impact on America going forward?
Once lauded as a voice of leadership, America's mayor has become a punchline. Using his voice to spread conspiracies and lies about the 2020 election being stolen.
I don't know what you need to wake you up. I can prove to you that he won Pennsylvania by 300,000 votes. I can prove to you that he won Michigan by probably 50,000 votes.
As former President Donald Trump's personal attorney and mouthpiece.
Let's have trial by combat.
Prosecutors say he is a target of an ongoing criminal probe examining efforts to overturn the 2020 election. And more, Giuliani is suspended from practicing law in New York.
The call for Joe Biden is it? What was it called by? Oh my goodness, all the networks. Wow! All the networks!
How are you, sir?
Great pleasure.
Good to meet you. So honored to meet you.
I must say.
Have a seat. Yeah, apparently so. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Well,
I've enjoyed your shows forever, particularly now, and big admirer.
Well, thank you. We're focusing on things that seem to be really important right now in this country's future.
You sure do. I commend you for that.
Tell me how you're doing.
I'm doing fine, but I find it strange to describe that to people when they tell me all the things that are going on with me.
Yeah.
But I think I'm constructed that way. I like to be challenged, Phil. I don't know what it is. I feel like if things aren't, not so much going wrong, but if there aren't things I can help with, I get into a feeling of I'm a little useless.
Yeah.
So I like to be able to help, and I like to think of my life as I'm contributing. And my main goal, which I'm worried about, is a little personal goal for me, that I leave this country better than I found it, for my children, my grandchildren.
Right. Do you ever feel like you've lived your life in two parts? Because there was a time when you clearly were one of the most beloved figures in American politics, certainly leading up to the weeks and months following 9/11, which was clearly one of, if not the darkest periods in American history.
Really?
And I personally want to thank you for the leadership that you provided during that time.
Thank you.
There's no question. I think back, and I was in Dallas when those planes struck the towers, and shortly after that, there are pictures of you walking down the streets towards what was happening and speaking to the American people, speaking to the world in such an inspirational way, not cowering, not panicking, being calm. You had approval ratings then. You were America's mayor. People were talking about you as someone that would be great as a president of the United States. And then in recent years, it seems to be a different chapter in your life where you're under indictment, you're being criticized. It seems like your approval ratings have dropped 50, 60% nationally, and you're under attack. Does it seem like there's two chapters?
Well, there certainly are. There's a tremendous conflict about me. Almost a divided America. I mean, it is weird, but I can take you to places where the support for me is stronger than it was then.
This seems to be one of them. A lot of people here feel very strongly about what you gave to this
Right.
country.
And then there are places where they're hateful, mean. They won't listen to my explanation. They personally feel, I think, and I'm speaking for them now, that I'm some kind of an enemy to the republic, to democracy, that I'm a liar, I'm a cheat, I'm all the things that for half my life I never was, and I put people in jail, for. Somehow I made this big change. I guess because of my attachment to Donald Trump. I think that's it. So it's a little hard. It's hard for the person to understand that when you're always, when you always view yourself as pretty much the same person. I've changed. I've learned things. I changed a lot between September 11 and after. I wouldn't deny that I'm a different person after September 11 than before. I think mostly for the good. Am I pretty much the same person, the same values that I was when I was going after the mafia and Milken and Boesky and communists, and I put Nazi war criminals in jail. I was threatened with murder by the mafia. They voted in my favor. I won 3-2.
To not kill you or kill you?
Not kill me.
Okay.
People say to me, what's the most important election you won? I said, well, the mafia voted 3-2 not to kill me.
50 years of practicing ethically and bringing down some of the worst criminals in our country's history. And there's no question about that. You were the first one to use the RICO Act against the mafia. Some of these guys wound up getting 100 years in prison.
Right.
That's what I mean about, like, there's two people sitting here. But in 1987, you also had prosecutors that went in and arrested and perp walked 3 traders on Wall Street, Wigton, Tabor, and Freeman. One of them, you actually put in cuffs and walked off the trading floor. And these guys, 2 of the 3, never had any charges filed against them. But yet it ruined their lives. And you said in '89 in a press conference when you were leaving as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, yeah, if we'd have known what we now know, probably wouldn't have approved that. Was that a publicity stunt? Was it an overreach? Were these overzealous young prosecutors? How did that happen?
Yeah, it's a little of all those things. It was, one, it was not an order to handcuff him. No one planned out in advance handcuffing. When the FBI and the Postal Service people got there, in the case of Mr. Wigton, he refused to leave. Said, come back after the trading day. Federal agents aren't that nice. When you say come back after the trading day, they're going to assume you're going to change documents. So they put him in cuffs and walked him out. The second guy got equally nasty with them, and they did that. The third guy, they didn't walk out. So it wasn't as planned as the next day. The newspapers loved the story and made it into a story that it was orchestrated by me. It wasn't orchestrated, it was happenstance. Did it have a good effect in a strange but somewhat unfair way? Yes. It scared the living daylights out of the Wall Street crooks. Now you say, well, were they Wall Street crooks? One of them went to jail for a deal of time. The other 2 weren't as seriously implicated, but they did cooperate. And they didn't get out because they were men of the year. They testified. A lot of people were never charged and testified for the government.
Was that prosecutorial abuse? Was it an overreach?
The putting of the handcuffs on was. They shouldn't have had the handcuffs on. To this day, I don't think it should have been done. And I do think, but I can't be 100% sure, that if they called me, I would have told them no. I didn't say that until years later, because I don't push off responsibility on the agents. I don't say, well, they made a decision I wouldn't make. They did. But they're agents. They have a tougher life than I do. Maybe if I were them, I would have made the same decision. The final thing, the idea that they were choir boys is ridiculous. They testified against the other 2. The other 2 just were far more guilty. We ended up putting 14 people in jail in that investigation.
And there's 2 chapters that I'm talking about. This RICO that you used against mafia is now being used against you.
Yeah, right. I started it, and now they're using it against me for All I can figure out is advocating for my client, but saying things they believe to be false. So if I say that there appeared to be fraudulent absentee ballots because my witnesses say that they had never been folded and they look pristine, they will say that I am perpetrating a claim of election fraud. But that's what I was told.
Well, they're doing this under Rule 11, right? You, as an officer of the court, you can't make a filing. You can't sign
I can't make a
something
filing
that says
no
you
one has
don't have
found me violated Rule 11. No one has found that.
But they've disbarred you because they say you're making claims that aren't warranted by existing law or evidence.
That's an issue on appeal. No one at the trial, the judge, my adversaries, at the conclusion of the trial, no one found I did anything ethical. No one, I've not been held guilty of violating.
Well, they didn't disbar you for being ethical.
They disbarred me on a separate proceeding brought by a political operative who had nothing to do with the trial, claiming I did all these things, and they refused to allow me to let in most of my evidence. For example, the judge refused to consider the fact that I have 12 hours of tape from Atlanta, 4 different perspectives of what went on in that hall in which I say thousands of votes were stolen. Lo and behold, when we get ready to go to trial, I realized that they had given me tapes with 3 hours missing. Not only are they giving me tapes with 3 hours missing, they had re-engineered them so the tapes looked like they were continuous. I proved that. I had the witnesses ready to prove it. And the judge, who was a product of the crooked Democratic political machine, refused to allow that tape in evidence. That tape would have conclusively proven that the very, very famous Secretary of State in Georgia, Ratzenberg, had produced an altered tape and that the prosecutor had offered it. It gets worse than that. The hours that were altered were the hours in which the alleged misconduct took place. So they're gone, bye-bye. The reason is the pictures would have demonstrated the multiple counting of ballots, the fact that people were thrown out so they couldn't see what happened, the fact that Biden got 200,000 votes at one period of time and Trump got about 80, which is impossible. The fact that the ballots were like this. That cannot be an absentee ballot. An absentee ballot, to be valid, has to be folded, cannot be signed, has to be in an envelope that is signed, in another envelope that's signed. Reason for that is you shouldn't be able to connect the final vote with a person because your vote is anonymous. All of those envelopes that you're talking about, you know how many are missing? From a state that should have been really careful if it were so interested in being as honest as Kemp and Ratzenberger say, 375,000 are missing. Just about the number that we estimated was the number that was fraudulent. So what the Bar Association did was, they haven't found a single lawyer involved in a single case with me that said I did a single unethical thing. All the allegations come from outside Democratic advocates, many of whom are paid for huge amounts of money. The women who obtained the $145,000 judgment against me have paid about $4 or $5 million in legal.
$145 million.
$145 million judgment, which is a ridiculous judgment. There's no way they had $145 million worth of damages. It's completely absurd. The lawyer representing them is Hunter Biden's classmate.
How did they get the judgment?
They got the judgment by going before a judge named Beryl Howell. They picked the judge. Beryl Howell was the most bloodthirsty judge in the District of Columbia.
Did you make admissions against interest in that case?
I did not. She concluded that my failure to discovery showed that I was guilty, which is absurd. The reason I couldn't make discovery is the FBI had seized most of my material, and she would not allow that as an excuse. She should never have gotten the case. The case took place in Georgia, not Washington.
Are you
it was there because it was fixed. All the garbage we're talking about, there's only one way we end this. You put the bad guys in jail. You put the bad guys in jail, the bad guys get scared, and they stop for a while.
I want to look at a map and get your opinion about this. This is where China has been allowed to purchase farmland, ranch land around our strategic military installations in the United States. And to me, this is really disturbing. We certainly could not go to China and purchase land around the Chinese military
100%,
installations.
Phil.
But we've got China purchasing land around Camp Pendleton, around Hill Air Force Base, around Fort Liberty, the Naval Air Station. They're setting up wind farms around some of these places where there's no wind, there's no propellers on the towers. There are listening devices, not propellers. How are we so asleep that we're allowing China to purchase land around all these military installations? How is this happening?
It's happening because China has, with a number of different strategies, some of which conflict with each other, has brainwashed us. So you can take aggressive strategy or very, very soft strategy. The Chinese were always much better at infiltration than the Russians. I'm going back to the 40s and the 50s. The Russians got all the attention for it. The Chinese got a major break when Kissinger and Nixon, I'm not criticizing it, because at the time, you had to make a decision. We got to separate China and Russia if we're going to win the Cold War. We can't fight both of them. So they decided, incorrectly, but I would not say unfair to them, because I might have decided the same thing with the facts they had. They decided China is not as dangerous as Russia, because Russia had more arms, and China's real poor. How far can they go with all that poverty? So let's go with China. Let's become friends with China. Let's utilize the 2,000-year anger and hatred between China and Russia. And we went with China, and we got fooled. We went too far. Was the initial decision correct? You're darn right. Do Nixon and Kissinger deserve, I don't know, the kind of awards that Arafat got? Yeah. As the years went by, China being a bad country became clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer and clearer. I agreed with them at the beginning. I can't tell you when I broke away. Probably Tiananmen. And this was always my area of great interest. Cold War, China, Russia. Paid more attention to that than all the things you've known me for. I wanted to be Secretary of State. That was my real goal as president. I think I know more about foreign countries than any of them, but I'm just an egotist. And then from Tiananmen Square on, it's been killing girl babies, wiping out the Uyghurs. They do a pretty damn good job of not calling it genocide, but wiping out Christians. They'll wipe out any Muslims that they can't make a deal with. They hate Muslims, they hate Christians, they hate Jews, they hate anybody with a religion. Mao Zedong, who's really the architect of their China, is even more understands the danger of religion even more than the Russians did. The Russians always had what you would call a conflict with religion, because a lot of them, even though they were communists, were Russian Orthodox. They remain Russian Orthodox. Like even Putin, if you know him, and I know him a little bit, and I talk religion to him, because he once, like me, thought of studying for a priest. It's the only thing we have in common.
You thought about being a priest?
Yeah. What a disaster that would have been. Oh, wow.
Well, what do you do from here forward? How can you have the biggest impact on America going forward? Well, we're out of time for tonight, but there's so much more to talk about. With all his recent legal troubles, was there ever a time Rudy Giuliani thought that he was in too deep, but just couldn't turn back? And how does he respond to allegations and sincere concerns that he may have a drinking problem? I want to talk about you. What's the next chapter in your life?
Help Donald Trump straighten out the federal government. I can smell the crooked politicians. They have a certain odor.
A lot of people say you drink too much.
Oh, geez, Doc.
You're disbarred, indicted, have huge multi-million-dollar judgments against you. Is there anything you would do different?
That's a really good question.
Is there a chance you're going to wind up in prison? Next week on Fill in the Blanks.